Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the Resources Overview Scrutiny Committee meeting today, Thursday, 7th of October. Notice of recording, can I remind everybody that this meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the Council's YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Apologies, I've received apologies from Councillor Barry, Councillor Green, Councillor Tricky, and Councillor Sharp. No further apologies. Declaration of interest. Members are reminded that they declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. If a disclosable pecuniary interest is declared, a member must not speak or take part in that agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Action notes from the meeting on the 22nd of July and 9th of September. 19.
As far as the informal meeting is concerned, I'm recorded as having given apologies, but I didn't give apologies. If it's an informal meeting, we wouldn't be required to give apologies, would we?
No. Okay, that's good. That's fine. Okay, agenda item 5, financial monitoring. We have Councillor Chatfield, Alison, Jared, and Mohammed. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't talk at length through this because, to be honest, the position hasn't moved a huge amount since the last monitoring report. Essentially, what we have in this report is a £1.2 million worsening of that position, so not particularly positive bit of news to bring, I'm afraid. So at the moment, we're forecasting a revenue overspend of 34.2 million. 7 million of which relates to an underspend on non-COVID issues. However, that is balanced off by 41.4 million that relates directly to the COVID situation. And obviously, we have applied what grant funding we have received, totaling some 17.5 million from ring-fenced funding. However, that obviously still leaves a significant gap. We're obviously working with officers to close that gap off. As yet, we haven't got significant progress report on that, but that is very much a live process. And I think possibly Alison might be able to give you a little more detail on that process as it's going on. But we are obviously working to close that gap off as best we possibly can. Obviously, there's more detail in the report about what the causes of that gap are, but I think they were explained in detail at the last meeting, so I won't go over them again. I said the position materially hasn't changed a great deal, except for the small worsening of the issue.
Okay.
So bringing Alison to cover off process on.
So I'm happy to look at some of the processes that are ongoing and have been ongoing since the reports first started. So there are dedicated teams set up and star chambers set up on a number of different initiatives, both for next year's budget and to bring those forward and initiatives to address this year's pressures also. There are also, as you can imagine, some very detailed discussions going on with business partners and HR business partners to deliver, in particularly the workforce savings. It is a very closely monitored process at present, and we hope to make some changes as we go through the year.
Any questions?
Yeah, Chair, might as well. There's only 3 of us, so I'll make up for it. If it's okay with you, Chair, we get this report on a monthly basis. I just want to get some of the detail of the report today, if that's okay with yourself, Chair. So I'll just go through some of the points. What about 15? So I'll go to 5, is that okay? There's 3 of them.
Leave it at 3, and if they are
I'll take
quick fixes.
No, they're only short questions, isn't it? The stuff that we've probably discussed previously, but if I can take it in like tranches of 5, they're not.
We'll start with 3.
Okay. We'll go with your suggestion of 3. Okay, 1.3 stated that £5 million of the savings are unachievable with another 4.1 million at risk. At some point, we're going to have to acknowledge that the savings aren't achievable, as you said in the report. And when will we then basically procure some contingency funding to balance the budget in that respect? 1.4, just look into the detail of this. There's a non-delivery of transportation saving of £400,000. Just wondering what that actually refers to. And 1.6, this is because obviously I'm quite curious about the debt that the council has in terms of the borrowing costs. I'm really interested in how much the borrowing costs are for the 74 new vehicles that we've procured over the last few months. That's 3, Chair.
Okay, if I take the borrowing one first, in this order. We rolled those 74 in 2 tranches, mainly last year and then at the start of this year. So we borrow the money and then we set an interest rate at the time of borrowing, because we try to borrow on a fixed rate because we don't want the variability of interest rates changing during the life of the loan. So for the vehicles, we took an asset life of 7 years because we aim to pay off the debt as long as the asset's in use, so that it's commensurate, the benefits are commensurate to the cost. So on the vehicles we bought last year, because the rate was set to start the year before the margin, we set a rate of 2.1% interest internally. So on that, each year we're paying about £769,000 for that £4.9 million, of which 695 is repayment of the actual debt, and the interest cost is 100,000. Basically, annuity over time, the principal increases and the interest rate drops. And then for the money that we spent this year, the borrowing, because interest rates have come down, we're looking at an interest cost of 1.7%.
Can I pick up the transport costs, if that's all right? That relates to the integrated transport unit that is being developed. It hasn't delivered the saving in year as yet, but it is being developed. That work is underway, and obviously optimistic that will be delivered in time. However, given the length of time it's taken to get to this point, and we are obviously nearly midway through the year, it is unlikely that that's going to deliver the whole 400k in a year.
And on your first point, the 5 million workforce saving, that's already built into the projection that we have for this year.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
The 3.
Yeah, okay. The next 3, are we still on track to procure the outstanding 51.2 million from the capital receipts as referred to in 2.4? In 3.1, I'm really pleased that the city, we're playing our part in the resettlement of our Afghan guests. I think we're taking in 18 individuals, which is welcome. And there's 3 schemes of funding available. Just want to know what the length of time those schemes will be running for, like 2, 3 years, 5 years. And more importantly, are we working hand in hand with charities and community organisations to collectively pool our resources together to help with the resettlement? And 3.5, the termination of the contract with North Birmingham Travel is estimated to cost around 3.29 million on a worst case scenario. Just wondering if you've had an indication around the cost of that. And if it's a breach of contract, is there any recourse that we have in terms of the contract in obtaining some compensation from the former providers? Thank you, Chair.
I'll pick up the last 2 if I can. So in terms of the Afghan refugee programme, I'll have to check exactly the duration. I think Councillor Cotton's probably better positioned to answer that than I can. But obviously, that is absolutely dependent upon working with the charitable sector. So yes, there's a huge one. We've been very supportive, and I know from my experience in the previous portfolio, but also in what Councillor Cotton presented to Cabinet last time out, there has been very close working with a number of charity groups who have been very supportive and absolutely fantastic in offering support for those individuals. And just on the issue of North Birmingham Travel and the cost, that 3.29 is considered to be the maximum. And actually, this question came up at Star Chamber only yesterday, and we are literally just getting the live cost data in now. So that will be extrapolated and should be able to be ready, I would imagine, by the next month.
On the capital receipts, yes, at the moment we are anticipating getting the 55 million by the end of the year. There's a number of disposals in various stages, either probably marketed all the way to being negotiated with the lawyers. So we're hoping that, but as you know, anyone can pull out at any moment in time. So there is always that risk around until we actually get the money in the account. But there are plans in place.
Just give you a breather because you're finishing some of my questions as well. So I'll ask a few, then I'll bring you back in.
Stop undermining the chair, councillor.
Anybody had any questions?
Okay, the cost of the shortfall, the 16.1 million, which is spread over 3 years on 3.1. You keep mentioning the comparison with other local authorities. Which are there similar local authorities that you're actually making a comparison to? And the other one was on, as is already covered, on the refugees, a bit more breakdown when you actually go back would be ideal. I know there's 80 we're talking about, and the breakdown I'd be looking for is for schools and the cost total. Is it families or is it just children? Just a bit more breakdown. And on 3.8, the SIP Education and Skills Budget Review. Will that be coming back to this committee once that review is complete with the report of likely to?
I'll say one quick and then.
It was very Let's see. 16.1, so I'm just trying to check myself. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to come back on that one if that's okay.
It's on 3.1.
Yeah, on the refugee, on the Afghan scheme, there was a lot of detail contained in the cabinet report about where the funding sources was. Obviously, look, there is a government funding package, it has different components to it, so I can get a copy circulated and get the right note. I mean, as I said, it's quite as ever with these things, it's quite complex. In terms of the SIPFA review, I don't see what, obviously, I haven't seen the copy yet, it's still a work in progress, but I don't see any reason why at least some of the conclusions could be shared with this committee, depending on what level of detail there is. I think we did a similar exercise, and my memory with neighbourhoods previously, so I don't see any reason why.
That actually came back to resources.
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't do the same thing. Education still, it is a very, very important piece of work, because a lot of the sort of future dependencies around SEND service and hospital transport, that sufficiency review put us in a position where we can look into the long term rather than simply trying to make adjustments on sort of, annual basis. So that's it is a very important piece of work. So important to share.
Thank you. Councillor Blue.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So on 3.6, with the reference to a bid, just wondering if that bid has been lodged and whether we've been successful and whether that one-off bid would be sufficient for the work that needs to be undertaken, and or whether there would be more one-off costs going forward in terms of revenue funding. 3.8, this is quite concerning because there's an overspend of 4.8 million Children's Trust, which is one of the most important sort of areas that the City Council has in partnership with the Children's Trust. So did we not see this last year and put more money into that particular department to assist them? And 3.11, the income is a reference to increase in income from green collection. We assume the green collection season is now effectively over now into autumn and winter, so I can't see anyone booking a green collection. Bulky collections, obviously, and we really welcome the new service we've got around the mobile household recycling centres, but clearly that would have an impact on any income that we were generating from the bulky collections. If people can dispose of their items in the mobile houses, that have been taken into consideration in terms of the income going forward. Thank you, Chair.
On those, in terms of the overspend on BCT, the Children's Trust, it is some obviously in cash terms, but out of a £200 million budget, I think it's about 2.2%, some of that figure. And again, we had a really good session with Andy from the Children's Trust yesterday to explore the sort of underlying causes of that. And I think they are, like children's services up and down the country, there is demand pressures that are significant, and those demand pressures aren't merely about numbers, which are increasing, but they're also about the cost of individual care packages for individuals, so much more complex, diverse needs coming into the system, which means that more expensive packages have to be procured for those individuals. As I said, they are doing everything they can to try and squeeze out the marginal costs, but obviously the vast majority of their costs are quite straightforward. These staff and placements, staff to support children and placements for those children. So in terms of route to manoeuvre, they're quite restricted. they are working and those numbers are heading in the right direction rather than the wrong direction. But so we're working closely with Children's Trust on those. And the last thing I'll say that there are long-term reasons to be optimistic around Children's Trust. They're doing a lot of really good work around early intervention, but a lot of that may well be a case of controlling the increase in demand. So you're reducing future costs rather than delivering a saving as per se. So it's kind of, that's something to watch. As I say, children's services all over the country are in significant degrees of pressure. And there is a big government review being undertaken, so it may well be that the landscape around children's services changes quite fundamentally. In terms of green collections, I think that simply reflects the fact that more people booked a green collection this year, which is obviously welcome. We want to encourage people to take it up. It's been higher than was budgeted for, so that's good news. What I would say though, in terms of the, so obviously, yeah, you're right in the sense that this won't be getting many more new bookings now than before, but the trend this year has been up, and then hopefully we'll see the same trend next year, or at least stable numbers projected into the budget figures. And then in terms of the bulky waste, I think it's probably too hard to make a prediction about whether there will be a decrease in the amount of paid for bulky waste collections as a result of the new service. It may well be, that might be a case, but it might be marginal. It may have no effect at all, and so this is a new scheme, so that wouldn't have been considered in the figures earlier in the year. So, but as part of that £7.2 million investment in clean streets, I think very popular, very welcome. But as I said, the impact of that in terms of bulky waste collection, we'll have to wait and see. But personally, I'll be surprised if it had a dramatic effect. Minor one maybe, but I'm expecting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. 3.18, there's going to be ample opportunities with the Commonwealth Games and no doubt potential lucrative contracts for various organisations. So I'm not quite sure how Ocean, who we've worked with, we've had a really good partnership for a number of years around advertising, if they're going to benefit, because I know in the planned procurement papers that have been provided to us for this meeting, there's a city dressing procurement, which in the face of it looks like duplication of the work that Ocean may be doing in terms of advertising. Just wondering if there's any sort of dialogue happening with Ocean City, if there's any opportunities we could explore with them. I know there's a reference to identify new planning sites for them. If there's any work being undertaken now, because planning can take several months to filter through before the Commonwealth Games takes place, so that they could benefit from that. 3.22, has there been any discussions around the pay awards with our brothers and sisters in the trade unions? And 3.24, there's a list of other risks. Do we have an estimate of the worst case scenario for perhaps the next 4 years? And if not, is that some information that could be provided to this committee going forward? There's 6 risks that have been outlined. Thank you, Chair.
Alison?
Yeah, well, I think on the advertising issues and the contract with Ocean. So the contractors for the main games are procured by the organising committee. So that's kind of out with our region, our Ocean contract. However, outside of those designated areas, then Ocean very much are in dialogue with the council and supporting us. And if you recall the launch year to go event that we had a couple of months ago, there was that massive banner on the outside of the car park just behind the rec. That was Ocean, and they've been working with us really successfully to see what they can support with regards to the games. That is an open dialogue, and we'll continue to have some really good results from that.
Can we get the pay award question, if that's all right? I mean, obviously, it's negotiated nationally. I think we happily have Tim here, so I don't know, Tim, maybe you could give a little bit more clarity on that.
Very, very happy to confirm you're quite right, Councillor, that it's a national award from employers to trade union side. The latest update is that all of the unions have now made the offer to their members, which has been soundly rejected by their members, and each union is at a different stage of moving forward with potential strike action, which will be on a national basis.
Which unions, which services are we talking about?
This is
This is
the whole thing that's on board.
Public service, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think, my colleagues have a longer memory than I do. I don't recall a pay over a strike over national pay settlement, but I might be wrong.
It's been a very long time.
Been a very long time. But
On the risks that I mentioned in 3.2, they are very difficult to quantify, even the worst case scenario, because it's so open-ended. Take, for example, Brexit and what's happening at the moment at food prices. We don't know whether that's the impact of Brexit or something else. What we did do last year as part of the medium-term financial plan, and part of the financial plan that went to council, is there's a risk register at the back where we do try to quantify certain risks, and we do that again, and that's been refreshed. So that gives some sort of idea over the next 4 years of what we think of known risks could be. But again, those are quite that would heavily caveat the fact that these are literally unknown.
I mean, it may be of interest to the committee. I don't know whether that's something that might be worth circulating, because it is quite, I find it quite interesting in that it both quantifies the cost and the probability. So you're talking about, say there's a likely cost of 100 million if that thing were to happen, but there is only a 1% chance of that happening, and therefore you write in a risk of 1 million. So it's quite, it's quite an interesting exercise, and actually quite sophisticated in terms of the way we're thinking about risk. That probably is not something that, certainly not something I've seen in my organisation.
That would be good to bring. The more people see it, will feed into it. Just make it more also.
Yeah, we used to do the opposite with income on sales forecasts. You estimate the income, you estimate the chance of winning, and crudely, provided you have enough in the pipeline, then the kind of calculation works. Provided you don't have some very big ones in there distorting the overall result. I mean, you know that we have a detailed risk register which audit committee considers. I mean, is this just kind of like a mini risk register?
Effectively, it's included in the MTFP exercise. So we'll actually be going to October cabinet, I think. October cabinet, and that's sort of the annual half yearly review that we're now actually doing on a quarterly basis. But that will include that risk, that financial risk, that high level strategic financial risk register in that document. So it is public, it's out there, but obviously we could bring it here as a separate item for interest.
Got to be careful we don't overlap. And then the two committees doing the same thing. You don't mention the Commonwealth Games, but I assume that's dealt with elsewhere. And the student village, which isn't the student village, but you know what I mean. That's got to be a risk, isn't it?
Yeah, it's because I suppose which is a strategic risk or not. What then you really are getting into the world of audit, aren't you? Which is there's risks, there's risk everywhere, isn't it? But as I said, we make some. What is different about this exercise is an attempt to financially quantify those risks, which is probably different to what we've had in the past, where they've been flagged as a risk, but not necessarily try to work out a matrix for costing that out.
This is part of our transparency, but also to try and link our reserves policy to our risks. We can show that based on what we think our risks are, we have adequate reserves or not. That informs the budget decisions.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Just the last point that the officer took the point. That's what I was really getting to. Like, do we use a risk register to quantify the amount of reserves we have in the organisation? Obviously, we've got risks. And then what Tristan said about having a percentage that there's a 10% chance of this may happen, where we may lose 100 million. So that's good to have as a committee, just so that more members are aware of the risks going forward. There's final two questions, Chair. Your permission. 3.26, neighbourhood services, obviously they're frontline services, they're the ones that residents tend to pick up on most. So I'm really interested if we could have a breakdown of the £1 million savings that are at risk under the neighbourhood, what impact they would have on frontline services, and if you could quantify that for each section, potentially not at this meeting, but if we can have some information going forward. And just final question, 3.31, you referred to an amount of 72.7 million in sundry debt. What percentage of that is the overall debt? And is that similar to what other core cities and neighbouring authorities have in terms of percentage? Thank you, Chair.
Give me 1 second. I am just the risks in city operations that are city operations rather than neighbourhoods, as it's been retitled. Those that are risks are revenue savings from the waste management vehicles. In the procurement was slightly slower than expected, although there is a counter saving, ironically, attached to that, because obviously we didn't borrow as early as we were expecting to, so there is a degree of balancing in that. There's an allocation of workforce savings, there is the review of managerial arrangements in street scene, and then there is a red risk around parks and nature conservation. But obviously if you require further details, don't provide those, but that's what I understand it to be.
What was the last area you referred to?
Parks and conservation. There is mitigation work being undertaken on those.
Just remind me, sundry debt is sundry debt. It's not council tax, is it?
No,
No, it's everything else. Everything else.
Excluding council rate business rates, it's all the other debts.
Excluding business rates, excluding council tax arrears.
Excluding housing rents.
I see. It's council house rents should be in that 72.
No, it should exclude
Excluding
that.
that. I just wondering what made 72 million of other debts.
That's the question. So is it?
There's a huge.
There's a lot of that we don't know, which is just miscellaneous days is probably a better phrase to add.
Yeah.
HMRC, depending on the timing of reporting, kind of HMRC, tax. There will be lots of different items in there, but we can provide a summary
Yeah.
breakdown.
Yeah.
For you.
Well, yeah, all I think is I mean, the VAT will get repaid.
Yeah.
That's a very low risk debt. But others in there might be incredibly high risk if someone's gone bust or something. So it just seems a very high figure when you take out all the areas we just took out.
The other one is adult packages of care, I think, as well, is a large, that's obviously, there's a lot of money flows through there.
Right.
And obviously some of those will end up in the debt.
I had a breakdown last week when I came to audit committee because of the accounts number. We can still get later, don't we? But yeah, we can definitely write that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's a figure that's audited, so there's assurance around that.
Can I bring in Councillor Hawkins?
Thank you, Chairman. It's reverting back to one of my favourite topics, unfortunately, and that is the Children's Trust and placements. What 3.7 doesn't give us is volume, is numbers. When we're in control, the leader and I used to have a weekly meeting on children in care and in placement. And it always fluctuated between about 1,700 up to 2,000, to give you an idea. And object obviously was to try and bring it down as safely as possible and protect the children. We don't have numbers in this particular report, Chair.
But it does say it's actually come down.
I know,
3%,
but it's actual volume, it's numbers that are important. And the other issue, which is very, very important, is that I know that we have a lot of very expensive, which Tristan made reference to, very expensive placements. And a lot of those placements are outside the city because they're getting very specialist care. And it's a point I've always made about trying to get repatriation into the city or as close to the city, because the children, if they've got families, are then getting the support from the families, which I think is very important. And I did pick up the £1.1 million shortfall in contributions from partners. Who are these partners? Is it our friends in the health service?
I believe so, but I'll check on that. I don't want to say anything out of that.
Okay. I'm just having an educated guess.
I believe that is the case. I mean, obviously, that's a shortfall on the budgeted figures, so it's a drop in expected income from that source. I think the important, you do raise that there's a couple of things. One of them is around the number of children in care. And it's safe to say that Birmingham, by core city averages, has historically, there's been less children placed in care than the other local authorities. So we are well below average and have consistently been with average for many years. Those numbers are increasing for a number of reasons. One is a more proactive approach to Children's Trust in existence, but also because of the complexity and the difficulty, just the demographic, some of the challenges we're facing as a city. I would say that a couple of the long-term pieces of work that I'm personally very interested in and very important. One is around obviously early intervention. So it's obviously critical to support families before they get to that stage, tying together homelessness, domestic abuse, all these kind of issues, feed into a picture that ends up with child and care. And then the second piece of work, again significant, is about trying to increase the number of children that were adopted by their wider families. So in other countries, I think it's America, something like a quarter of children in care. Half of children in care are adopted into a family member, relative. Here it's, less than 10%, or has historically been less than 10%. We are increasing that number in Birmingham, in the hope that we can reach the national average, which I think is 17%, off the top of my head. we're around something like 10% at the moment, trying to get to around 17%, and obviously push beyond, because actually, there's very, very good, very strong evidence, as I understand it, that it's a much better for family care compared to family, assuming, of course, all your relevant checks and everything done, everything safe. But also, there's obviously a financial imperative as well. That setting is by far and away the cheaper setting in terms of what it costs us as a local authority. So there is, that's obviously for me very much a secondary consideration. But the point is, it is the route to travel the Children's Trust are really exploring and pushing is around this wider family adoption, which I think is a good thing. And that hopefully will in time reduce the pressure in terms of both numbers and cost. But that is a long-term project and is not going to yield immediate results.
It's an aspiration that has passed on from control to control.
It is, I think the Children's Trust have made significant progress already down that agenda. Obviously, it's slow going. It's not so you can turn, you're not going to suddenly increase.
No, you can't turn it up.
But progress is heading in the right direction.
I never lose sight of the fact that collectively we are corporate parents, and that is a heavy responsibility on each and every one of the 101 members of the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you for that. We move on to agenda item 6. We have here Tim Normanton. Thank you. He's the acting assistant director for HR. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much. So we were asked to present an update on the work to transform human resources and organisational development services, and further update to follow on interim consultants expenditure. So the very latest in terms of the People Services Transformation Programme is that we have launched formal consultation with staff yesterday on a proposed future model, following the commitment from Cabinet to invest in the service next year. So the presentation sets out the context and backgrounds to that. So we're happy to move on.
Just that there is a little bit of a delay on this, so I will do it, but you might just have to keep talking and the technology will catch up. There we go.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so the kind of target operating model for people services is very much around much more than just changing the structure of HR and OD. It is about a fundamental shift in the way that we work with and as part of the organisation. So there are 8 aspects to the transformation programme, and driven by our vision, which is something that we co-produced with our staff following consultation with our customers. So it's very much about being a people service who empowers our people, proactively providing insight. We are a trusted partner to the organisation, enabling the council to deliver its priorities. And we are committed to enabling all of our diverse talent to flourish. That is our vision as a people service moving forwards. We have 8 aspects of the programme, which are about focusing on delivery of those commitments and that vision. So ensuring we have the insights and the data that the organisation needs about the workforce, making sure that we are custodians of the culture and the values of the organisation, working to improve skills and develop our workforce, the customer experience, interacting with people services, so making sure that where staff and managers interact with people services, that's a positive experience, having the right processes and controls in place, so ensuring that people are able to do the right thing and that we have governance and oversight of that, a service delivery model where we have the right people doing the right thing to deliver all of those elements, a culture of innovation and continuous improvement, so they're always seeking to improve the service that we provide, and finally making the most of our technology. So the implementation of the Oracle ERP is an important part of that, but looking at other systems that we utilise in people services to add value to the experience of employees in the organisation. So the key drivers in terms of this change is very much about for our people being able to aspire to be a best-in-class employer, So this is very much about trying to make sure that everybody has the best possible experience. That means that they are engaged, that they are committed, and that they're delivering the highest quality of services to our citizens. Part of the Invest in the Future programme that was agreed earlier this year was about an aspiration for best-in-class services. So that is driving our important transformation programme to be a best-in-class people service to the organisation. And finally, in terms of value for money, it's about ensuring that what we are providing, we can demonstrate is adding value to the organisation from the investment that's been committed. So the next slide gives an indication in terms of the current experience of people within the City Council of the people of the current Human Resources and Organisational Development Service and our aspiration for the future people service. So the feedback that we get is members of the team are frustrated that they aren't able to better support managers and leaders in the organisation with insights into the workforce. We want to be able to provide that insight, give managers up-to-date data in relation to the workforce and enable them to make well-informed decisions. For our HR services team who are dealing with transactions, we have a huge volume of transactions coming into the function, and many of them are actually failure demand. So we very often find that the team are dealing with something that they've dealt with once, twice, 3 times previously. So we want the experience of the employee to be that they do it once and it works right the first time. Better for the employee, better for our team. For staff, they feel that it's difficult to get into HR. They don't know how to speak to people, they don't know how to get to the right place. So we want to make it very simple for people to get into people services, talk to the right person, and have their issues addressed. Oracle is a very important part of our partnership with finance because that will enable us to have a single version of the truth when it comes to financial data and workforce data. And finally, the key point for us is at the moment, the HR and Organisational Development Service is in many respects reactive to the needs of the organisation. We want to shift to being a proactive, trusted partner who really adds value and helps the organisation to move forwards rather than addressing immediate challenges. So I mentioned earlier that the vision was developed in partnership with stakeholders. There were a number of surveys and workshops, and we worked with KPMG to be assessed against the model which they use with a wide range of organisations to determine where our HR service was in terms of maturity compared to best in class across the country. So you can see in the first column where it states that the current rating, our customers on a 5-point scale rate us 2.3 in terms of employee experience, 2.4 in terms of the model, the quality of the service that we're providing, and 20% of the way there when it comes to career pathways through the existing HR analytics service. Our aspiration is to be best in class. Our target with this programme over a 3-year period is to reach a 4 or above on that 5-point scale, recognising that global leading practice at a 5 is organisations who have virtually unlimited resources. So a 5 would be something like Microsoft or Google, which would be very difficult for us to replicate in a local authority. But we absolutely want to be best in class. And on the final point of value for money, that is about understanding the baseline in terms of what we deliver currently and being able to demonstrate the substantial improvements that we're delivering over the 3-year period of this programme. So the key elements, the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve here is investing in strategic leadership for the people agenda. So this is about having capacity and capability to deliver the workforce agenda across the organisation and influence the extended council and leadership team to prioritise those workforce matters. It gives us greater accountability and control within a people services directorate. It means that with business partners, with a business partnering model delivered through people partners, we have a team who are embedded within directorates and really understand the workforce challenges across the organisation and can influence, shape, and mitigate risk in relation to workforce. We reduce duplication, we standardise, we simplify with the service delivery centre. We provide improved strategic workforce strategy and planning, so we understand where we are and where we want to be in terms of the workforce. We develop those best-in-class strategies around some of the key challenges to the organisation. So modernising our approach to reward, to talent management, to learning and development. We want clear career pathways through the people service so people can see their opportunities to grow as part of the team. And one of the critical aspects for us is that analytics capability that I talked about earlier. Working in partnership with finance, with ICT, to be able to help the organisation really understand where we are, what that means for where we want to be. We want to make sure that technology underpins everything that we do and enables hybrid working and remote working as we move forwards. And we are pursuing external accreditation with the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development as a people development partner. Ultimately, the aspiration of all of this is that a better people service means a more engaged workforce, a more high-performing workforce, and improved outcomes for citizens. The service delivery model is essentially based on three key service areas and shaped around a tiered response to organisational demand. So tier 0 is about self-service and people being able to solve their own people problems as far as possible. Tier 1 is where things become a little more challenging and people need dedicated HR support. And tier 2 is the point at which we take on cases. So it's managing specific activity, which means named professional to support that, whether it is a recruitment campaign, a reward issue, a training programme, or employee relations casework. There is then a third tier within that central people service delivery function, which really is about service improvements and understanding what we're doing and how to make it better. Tier 3 on the left-hand side is very much about centres of excellence, and this is where that strategic capability sits to drive the activities in that salmon-coloured box on the left. On the right-hand side is that strategic business partner that I mentioned earlier, where our people partners are that interface with the organisation, looking at workforce planning, business transformation, and delivering the people agenda. And following the bottom right-hand corner, we have dedicated programme capacity to deliver those big corporate programmes which are important to people with a wider organisation. So ERP, 1B programme, new ways of working, Commonwealth Games and job evaluation are the current live programmes in that area. The next slide provides a little bit more detail in terms of the tiering that I just talked through. And this is very much about a model of filtering through the level of complexity into a service and ensuring that people get the right level of support at the right point, depending on the nature of the challenge that they're facing. And by managing demand into the service and investing in that strategic capability, we are confident that this will deliver improved outcomes for the workforce and for the citizens. And finally, in terms of timetable, so I mentioned at the outset we've commenced formal consultation with the staff in the existing HR and OD service. That will run through until the end of this year. We will then be able to move forwards in terms of implementing a new structure. That will happen early in the new year in order to be in place ahead of the implementation of Oracle in April 2022. Following the implementation of Oracle, we will be maximising the benefits of the new ERP system. And And then once we have stabilised that and confident we have all the systems and processes that we need in place, we move on to delivering those high value, long-term sustained services and move into that best in class model. So that's an update on the services transformation.
Thank you for that. I'll start. Never mind. Just going through that, I've had a look at the plan. Very ambitious, considering where we are today. People are different. I've been in management 35 years, and yes, it is ambitious, but people are different. How is it going to impact, especially the long-serving people who have done it like this for years and years, and they are reluctant to change, and that's human nature. You know, I've done it for 30 years, so why do I need to change? The milestones, I know you've got the last slide that came up about when, but we're talking about people.
Yes.
And we're talking about the training and what level of training people are going to receive. I know the ambitious ones, the youngsters, they will have a great opportunity, but we've got to think of whole of our staff in HR and everywhere else. So have you put things in place for people maybe changing jobs or not wanting, well, I've done it this way for 20 years, so why do I need to change? So have you put, things in place to actually protect the people who are long serving? And really, this is the way I've always done it. So, looking at that, looking at the figures where we are well behind, 20%, and 2 point whatever it was, we've got a long way to go, and I think it is very, very ambitious, and it'd be worth having some milestones, not as a bulk, we'll achieve this, but milestones reference our employees on where they need to be, and there needs to be an impact capacity done on the people. There's a lot of work involved in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. And I absolutely agree, it's ambitious. I think that's an important part of our aspiration as an organisation to be best in class, and recognising that in some areas we do have a very long way to go. Your point is quite right, that we do have a workforce as a significant proportion who've been with us for a long time and are particularly interested in progression. But for us, what we want is to create that strategy which helps us in terms of resourcing, so helping make sure we're clear what we need and that we've got the right skills to do that. And when we don't have those skills, that talent strategy, which helps us to identify who does have those skills, how we develop those skills, and then the work around recognition and reward. Because we have employees who have broadly done the same job for 30 years, but actually they've done a really good job for 30 years, and we want to be able to recognise and celebrate that. And at the moment, as I say, our HR no-do function is only really resourced to do the essentials. And we want to do what we think are really value-adding things, like recognising and rewarding those people who are doing a good job and don't currently feel that the organisation is celebrating.
No?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my move.
I was only
Sure.
going to say, my perception of personnel is that its main function is to protect the employer from the employees and all the legislation that goes with it. And I think, that, the presentation is packed with buzzwords and it's all the right things, and I know you've learned to say the right words, but in the end, your function is to protect the taxpayer from a highly unionised workforce. And you can't blame the unions. I mean, their job is to get the best terms and conditions for their members, and they absolutely will do it. And generally speaking, they do a better job than we do in the process of that negotiation. I also think we have to recognise two other things, that we'll never really compare ourselves with organisations like Microsoft and Oracle, because if you took the average intelligence of their workers and their remuneration, it's a different league really to something like the council, where we have a very, very wide range of employees, from highly qualified professional accountants and lawyers at the top end to people that are doing really very simple jobs. Well, that doesn't happen at Microsoft and Google, really. So I wouldn't beat yourselves up too much in terms of the fact that we probably won't get there. And the other challenge that we have is that, can we ever achieve the private sector ethos in terms of services to clients? Because in the end, if we don't deliver, it doesn't really matter, does it? The fact is that in a private business, if my physio doesn't agree to give me an appointment, she doesn't get the £60 for the appointment, right? If my GP doesn't give me an appointment, it makes no difference because he gets paid anyway. And I think you've always got that challenge, but on a huge scale in somewhere like Birmingham. And those are not really questions, they're just reflections on your challenge.
Absolutely, and if I may, I think, picking up your point, my view is that currently we have a HR and organisational development service which is very much focused on what you described in terms of compliance and protecting the employer. What we want to be is a service which really adds value to the organisation with that engagement and empowerment of the workforce, working in partnership with trade unions. Because if we can increase productivity, if we have a more engaged workforce, then that benefits us in terms of quality of service provision, reduced absenteeism, better outcomes for citizens, reduced complaints. This is one of those potential areas which has a massive impact on the organisation.
Can I just say, just a quick bit, apart to endorse everything that Tim said, and I think the direction of travel is very much welcome. Just to make a quick point about the consistency of the approach we're trying to get to now, between where we're introducing the progress we've made in the finance service, and in terms of the new operating model there. The new operating model in HR, as you see, is being developed and implementation is went slowly, and also procurement. And there are similarities across the board with those three, in that they are dependent upon, obviously the rest of the organisation is dependent on them. And we are introducing things like business partners. They have a different name in head, it's people partners, which is, but they have different names, but essentially the same function, the same purpose, high level support for directorates around their service needs. So there is a consistency of approach across those back office functions, whatever you want to call them. But I think perhaps has been lacking before, and we're hoping that what you get is learning across the organisation. So finance may be slightly further down the route, and therefore we hope that HR and procurement can learn with the implementation of their operating model, see how that's worked in finance and how it's landed, and then how you have to bring staff along with you and implement that across the organisation. So there's that kind of the approach of taking it all into one directorate effectively under Becky Hallard's leadership is to create that consistency of approach across the organisation. And I think we're starting to see early signs of that coming to fruition.
I agree. Finance is in much better shape now than it once was. The only other thing I will say is you've done a presentation to a scrutiny committee about HR, but you haven't mentioned the elephant in the room, which is that we've just recruited an interim HR director. The fact that we are temporarily changing the person at the top at vast expense, I can tell you, by the way, that's got to be a significant factor, isn't it, for this committee to be cognizant of.
Well, I think they are. I don't think it's a state secret. I think it's important to note that the structure has changed. So you have, as I said, you have the city operations, city management directorate now, and HR within that broader tent now, I suppose. It has changed a bit in terms of that. And obviously we have a permanent director in place, Becky. But Dan's point obviously is very much welcome. Looking forward to working with him. I think he'll bring very strong leadership. His background, Gatwick is a place and Ray in London. Phenomenal background in terms of experience, in terms of working with trade unions and delivering change in organisations. So I think really welcome to bring those skills and expertise into the organisation.
Thank you, Councillor Mahmood.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's a target to get to legal practice in 5 years, as mentioned on the slide, which does seem incredibly long time. For example, like if you look at February last year, no one expected the majority of the workforce to be working from home, which is a massive transformation change, which takes away everything else we're trying to achieve because we just haven't changed all of that. We're just wondering if you've got any comparators with neighbouring authorities. You work with neighbouring authorities or core cities around their people services approach. Have we started a consultation with trade unions around the changes, and how does the programme sit with agency and temporary staff?
In reverse order, we'll be talking agency and temporary staff in a moment. That's a very important focus of the resourcing strategic function that we're proposing. So that's the workforce, where that workforce comes from and what it's delivering, and making sure that that is value for money. In terms of working with trade unions, we've launched consultation this week. So I was talking to the trade unions on Tuesday morning about this. And in relation to working with partners and the wider local government, as we prepared the business case that was taken to Cabinet, we spoke to Core City HR functions. We also spoke to the West Midlands Employers Organisation and did a lot of work benchmarking best practice models to come up with the type of operating model we propose.
Okay, well, whilst we've got you here, I need to talking about all things human resources. Whilst we've done some incredible work around reducing the gender pay gap with officers and recruiting more people from some minority groups, if you even agree with me, the last time I checked the figures, the largest minority group in the city is the Pakistani Kashmiri group, and they're severely underrepresented. Need to declare an interest on part of that group as well. And they're severely underrepresented in the council by about 60 to 70% in terms of where they should be, coupled also with the Bangladeshi community. And what work has actually been undertaken to try to recruit more people from those groups that we're more representative of the city?
Absolutely. And you're aware of our workforce race action plan. We are delivering that. So the latest development, which is starting to impact across the council now, is piloting blind recruitment in certain areas of the organisation. So removing all the information that could identify somebody's background from an application form. We've improved recruitment selection training for managers. That's now mandatory and monitored. We've introduced diverse selection panels, which again is mandatory and monitored. And we are working with our staff networks to identify those groups of staff who feel that they haven't had a voice previously, to give them that voice, understand their challenges, and put in place appropriate actions to address those. So there are a number of strands of work ongoing, and we are confident, as you highlighted earlier, there's good signs of progress in terms of pay gap. There are signs of progress in terms of better representing the community that we serve, and we are confident that we are on track to meet our aspiration that by 2025 we will reflect the communities we serve, crucially, throughout our organisational structure.
Well, we'll have a good comparison when the census figures come out in terms of what we've achieved. The city council targets to be set.
Yeah, just on that, Tim, you say taking some of the stuff away to not identify. We used to do surveys at work and staff surveys. They will ask you where you work, what department you actually work, because they didn't want to show ethnicity. But within that area, I was the only Pakistani there. So to take my name off, it was irrelevant because they knew who it actually was. So when you actually do these taking the names off, surely there are loopholes where people will know that who's actually applying, even if you take the names away. So it's really, really difficult to actually do it that way because we've tried it and I've worked for a huge organisation in manufacturing, and it's almost impossible, even if you try and hide. But
trust me, it's really, really difficult. You know who's put the application in.
Absolutely, and we are piloting an approach, so we want to understand the impact that that has and whether it has the desired effect, which is to increase the diversity of the shortlist, which is called boards to interview, because that's one of the key things that's identified in the Workplace Equity Action Plan, is the conversion from shortlists, from applications to shortlist, is a point in the process where we are losing some of that diversity. So we are hopeful that by making that recruitment decision blind, that will increase the diversity of the shortlist and therefore increase the diversity of appointments.
But at all times you will select on merit.
Absolutely.
And that's all anyone can do.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks everyone for your contributions. Next is the update on the interim consultants. Unfortunately, Amanda's not here, so Tim, you've got the next presentation as well.
Yes, indeed, I've doubled up. Yes, as part of our route to zero, Amanda is not travelling up from the southeast to give the presentation. So I have an update, and I shall start by saying that the data that I'm providing comes from our procurement team, and we are currently doing some work with directorates to really get under the skin of this data. So straight away, there is a health warning that this procurement data, you will note, is 4 months old now. And we are doing some work to validate with directorates and be very clear on exactly what interim consultancy assignments are live at this time, the value and the exit strategy for them. So back to that point earlier about insights and analytics, one of our aspirations that we will be able to provide much more accurate and timely data to inform decision making. That said, you can see the detail here in terms of expenditure on interims and consultancies, comparison over the last 2 years and year to date. And you'll note that broadly, interim expenditure is comparable to previous year. Consultancy expenditure has increased significantly. The key element here that we need to be able to unpick is understanding how much of that is revenue funded and how much of that is transformation funded, because a substantial proportion of that expenditure is transformation funded, and there is a business case to demonstrate the value of that consultancy in terms of long-term impact on the organisation. The second slide illustrates, on the basis of that period 4 reporting, the current direction of travel. So, as I've described previously, you can see that the trajectory at that point for interim expenditure would mean that we were broadly in line with expenditure the previous year. In terms of consultancy expenditure, on its current trajectory, that is likely to exceed the previous year expenditure. As I say, I think the crucial point there is to recognise a significant proportion of that is transformation funded and is about investing to deliver long-term savings to the organisation. The next slide goes into the detail for our Hayes contract. So over 90% of all the agency staffing within the City Council is via our Hayes contract. There are a number of areas who have agency staff outside of the contract, and we are proactively working with those areas to bring the suppliers into Hayes. Hayes are our first tier provider. We have 32 other agency providers which subcontract to Hayes, which means that the Hayes contract is able to service almost all of our needs as an organisation. You can see that there has been quite a bit of fluctuation in expenditure over the 12-month period to the end of August. For that period, our expenditure is just over £42.5 million. I think it's important to recognise that clearly during this period, there was a significant amount of agency staffing required as a result of COVID response. So again, we don't have the detail here, but a significant number of agency staff, when we set up our test and trace activity, our hubs across the city, those were exclusively staffed by Hayes workers. we had hundreds of people that we brought in very quickly to deliver that testing capacity across the city. So that will impact on this year's expenditure and this profile. The next slide gives you an indication of, I mentioned how many suppliers there were within Hayes contract, so you can see the breakdown of the top 10 providers, and this is where we give you the headcount numbers of new starters. So you can see how many new agency workers were being brought in through this period, and you can see that there is quite a bit of fluctuation between where Hayes are directly providing staff and where those second tier providers are bringing in headcount for us. The small green bars are where individuals are being payrolled by Hayes that have been introduced outside of the core contract. And I think this illustrates for me the fluctuating demand for contingent labour. You can see how we have a significant turnover in this group, a lot of people coming through this contract, supporting the fluctuating demand across the organisation. And then finally, the detail of the overall headcount population of agency staffing. And you can see a general trend overall of increasing headcount throughout this period. The area of focus for us in HR at the moment is in the circle diagram. You can see that we have a significant proportion of agency workers who have been with us for over a year. And that is our focus in terms of workforce planning, to understand where services are becoming dependent on contingent workers, why that is, and what we can do in terms of workforce planning to secure a payroll workforce to deliver on services where there is ongoing demand. So that's a high-level overview of the latest position on consultancy, interim and contingent workforce.
Okay, thank you for that. You just touched on it right at the end about how long this agency people. If it's longer than 12, 18 months, I know it's been difficult because of COVID, but under normal circumstances, we need X number of people, especially when it's in hundreds, and we really seriously start looking at, permanent employees, because obviously it's going to cost a lot more having them through either Hayes or one of the subcontractors. So is that piece of work started? Have you started actually looking at that? So, if it's 100, we probably definitely need 50 people as a permanent. I don't know what that figure is and where these posts are. Already started looking at options on having permanent employees rather than just relying on Hayes or any other contractor.
Absolutely. So there are a number of areas where we're developing those workforce plans that move services away from dependence on agency workers to recruiting to vacancies in structures. One of our organisational challenges is that there are a number of areas where our pay structure does not enable us to attract the skills that we need in terms of market rates. So one of the areas where we have significant numbers of agency workers who have longer tenure is in our ICT service. So our pay and grading reward structure is not competitive in the national IT markets, and the only way we are able to fill some technical vacancies is with agency staff. That is something that we're addressing as part of a larger programme of recognition across the organisation. So one of the benefits of the people programme that we're proposing is that we will be able to create a pay and reward structure which helps us to attract and retain people, reducing our dependence on agency staff.
But have we got, say, agency workers to our normal employee in the same role? And obviously that we pay the agency a lot more than our permanent employee anyway.
Yes, so there are a number of areas where we have agency workers who have been covering vacancies, and the challenge to management is to say that you recruit to those vacancies rather than become dependent on those vacancies.
Sorry, Tristan.
I just it follows on actually the point I was going to make. I mean, just clear, my view has always been that there is circumstances in which we will have to use contingent labour, whatever. There is, I think, probably two main causes, one of which is around there may be specific projects or programmes that are term limited projects. So ERP would be a really good example where you need labour in special skills for a certain period of time, and you're not going to bring those in on a permanent basis. Then you've got areas where there may be seasonality, so you have to bring in staff. In the context of this, for example, where we have fluctuating, we'd like to get rid of some of that automation and various things, but as it stands, there is fluctuating demand throughout the year, and therefore to cover up that fluctuation, you may need some contingency work. And obviously there is things like staff, there may be staff sickness in particular areas. What we should not use them for is that covering of vacant positions. This is what it may be necessary on a very short-term basis, but as Tim says, if that becomes a dependency, then it's a problem for the organisation. We need to work through where those are and strip those out to the best as we possibly can and get to a position where our permanent workforce is our permanent workforce.
Thank you. Tim, I doubt whether you're going to be able to answer the questions that I'm going to pose to you. But here goes anyway, bearing in mind that we are paying nearly £43 million in fees to, well, not fees, in wages and fees to the Hayes and their friends. First of all, it is how much volume of the £43 million are fees to the top 10.
Yeah, and I can provide some assurance. I'm not 100% in terms of commerciality, so I won't share a specific figure in terms of the margin on the Hayes contract, but I can assure you that was a robust procurement process through a framework. And when we bring in new providers, I mentioned earlier, we have a number of areas who have other agencies supplying their staff. When we bring them into the Hayes contract, we invariably secure a significant reduction in the markup. And I think it's important to recognise, further to the Chair's earlier comment, that actually in some areas, agency staff are actually cheaper for us with the Hayes market margin than an employee who's a member of a local government pension scheme.
I know all the others. I've been there. I've got the marks still on my back. I've done my time on that. Shells, haven't I? Business transformation, Christ, it's like a stick of rock. The other issue is, have there been any of the interims or consultants who then joined the full-time staff?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Now, there hangs a tale, because normally Hayes and their friends will charge a significant finder fee to us. And that really turns the whole argument about interims and consultants on its head. Because, okay, somebody is fitted in well and all the rest of it, but we are then paying through our nose for the privilege of employing them. Now, I'll ask two questions. I didn't expect you to be able to give me the answers off the top of your head, but I would be grateful if you could let me know. A, as far as the fees that are paid to Hayes and the list.
I can answer that. The Hayes contract has no introduction fees. Their margin is purely through hourly.
Right, okay, but then on the second question that I asked him, whether some of the interims or consultants have then joined the full-time staff, we are going to be paying finder fees to Hayes and there.
Almost invariably, yes, there's a range of suppliers of interim consultants.
So if you can let me have that information, I'd be grateful.
That's right, so Hayes don't charge a fee.
That's correct.
But the others might.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Councillor Member?
Yeah, just I'll pick up on that councillor raised. It would be interesting also out of curiosity than anything else to how much finance fees we have paid to the other agencies, because you've said Hayes contract stipulate there's no introductory fees. And what specific areas, so that's where we need to do more work. And I agree with Tristan around the need to stop the dependency culture as well. So we don't rely on a particular workforce, having all agency workers. One of the areas I want to focus on, because the agency worker data, it wasn't broken down into specific areas. I know a few years back, we had a recruitment drive to minimise reliance on agency staff at the depots for street cleansing and for refuse collection. And I'm not sure if that's now been finalised or I was speaking to one of the officers when we had a mobile housing recycling unit, one of the drivers, and he's still an agency worker. And I found that difficult to fathom because I thought we had come to the conclusion that we weren't going to rely on agencies because of the costs, etc. That was entailed in that. But I agree with you. You've said it a few times. It's incredibly difficult to quantify between the value for money for consultants and for permanent employees because there's add-ons in terms of pensions, etc. that we have to pay. And I also acknowledge, as Tristan said, that for certain one-off projects, we've got no choice other than have consultants like the ERP program. There's no way we can pay the staff that are monitoring and can work on that on the sort of like the paywalls that we have. But as a city, I think we do need to do a lot more in terms of being like the exemplary employer and the number one employer in the city, because we are the city. So we should have an abundance of apprenticeships. We should have an abundance of training programs. We should have, we're blessed with, 4 or 5 magnificent universities, both based here in Birmingham and within commuting distance of Birmingham. And we should be using those universities to procure the best, the brains in the city and from the country, because they're all here based in Birmingham. The more we should do, and then coupled with that, we should retain those people. Once we've trained them, what we don't want to do is train them for 2-3 years, make them the best surveyors or lawyers, and then all of a sudden they shoot off to the private sector. We should have something inbuilt into their contracts that they pay back the training that we've provided to them. So I think it's a long-term strategy that we need to start in the council. You do seem to be on the right track.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think on that final point, a really fundamental part of the talent strategy that we want to develop is that graduate recruitment, apprentice recruitment. One of the challenges for the organisation is our demographic profile. We need to attract a different workforce to be able to deliver services in the longer term, because at the moment, over 40% of our workforce is over 55. So we need to bring through more talent that will be here as we go through this period of transformation. And on the earlier point, the street scene service is currently recruiting to 100 vacancies in the service, with the expectation that agency staff currently working in the service will be very strong candidates for those roles, and therefore we will be able to significantly reduce the number of agency workers and increase the number of staff and payroll within street scene.
To be blunt, if you've got an agency worker who's been refuse collection for say 10 years, they should just be automatically be given a job. I don't even understand why they have to go through the whole recruitment process.
Well, there's a number of things driving this mind. I mean, as a group, we're more concerned about the top end consultants that we spend a fortune on, and we see very little value for money coming back for that. I mean, the recruitment of refuse workers is a very different situation, and driven by 2 things, isn't it? As Tristan rightly says, we have to be able to respond to peaks and troughs in demand. But also, it's the problem with employment legislation that, once you get somebody employed, it's very hard to get rid of them. And the advantage of this type of arrangement is it gives you more flexibility in terms of people you don't want to keep. I agree with, if someone's been at temp for 10 years, there is a kind of, purely the argument, isn't there, for saying, well, he's got a job because he wouldn't have been there for 10 years if he didn't. And if we've trusted him for 10 years, we could probably take a chance to give him a job.
We'll take it.
No, you're going to
Yeah, trust it.
But we don't need to interview, just give him, we don't need to interview, just give him a job for Christ's sake. He's been there doing it right for 10
equal
years.
opportunities.
What more do you want?
I agree that Councillor Jenkins doesn't happen often.
You want a more flexible labour workforce?
Okay, there's no more questions for Tim. Tim, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you so much, Charity, for making it. Right, agenda item 7, plan procurement activities, the reports.
Just very quickly, members will be familiar with this. This is an opportunity for you to flag any particular issues you may have with this in advance of Cabinet. It's the standard list of things under delegations which the council needs to purchase. I would just, if I can just add one thing for early awareness, there is a potential for a late item to be added for Cabinet, which relates to a work scheme where unfortunately the contractor, and you may have seen it in the national news, a large contractor has gone insolvent, and therefore at very short notice we need to find a replacement. The report has been drafted up. The company is doing the works in the south side round. It's something like MC Construction, and they are large listed companies. They're fairly substantial, but as I say, have unfortunately collapsed as a company, and therefore at short notice we're going to have to find a alternative. So we're hoping to attach a paper to this prior to Cabinet, but obviously it will be circulated in the proper manner beforehand by just 5 minutes. There you go. So
MCM.
There you go.
Yeah, Chair, just on the cash collection, I'm just looking at the terms, 4 years, an increase in contactless payment, I think next week, 15, that contactless payment increases to £100. Do we really need a 4-year term for cash collections? I'm assuming less people are using cash in our legislative, etc. And just on the, just talking about HR again, on transport plan, and the Smithfield development and the professional services to support residential property acquisition, I still find it incredibly difficult to find that we don't have the expertise in the council to deal with some of those services that are going to be procured outside. For example, in the professional services for the residential property acquisition, we've got an abundance of surveyors in the city council. We've got an army of solicitors in excess of 200 the last time I did a count of legal services, but yet we're still procuring a contract for someone to carry out the conveyancing process for the 230 properties. You deal with right to buys on a weekly basis. Every Monday, you have hundreds of right to buy transactions that you deal with as lawyers in the council, and you're still going to procure this out. So I find that difficult. Thank you, Chair.
I've got 2 questions. We've really got 200 lawyers in the council.
Yeah.
Not on the payroll, but I think somewhere in that interim consultancy data, we do have a significant. And I think part of that is recognising that there's a great deal of work going on in relation to each department.
Which is still need to properties.
Yeah, many
Give them one
learning.
each.
Got one property.
Give them one each.
Okay, just one meeting, please.
Yeah.
Do you want to come back on that before? Councillor Jenkins?
Yeah, on the cash collection, I think it's a per transaction arrangement, or so it depends on volumes. So if there's, as you rightly, I mean, obviously we would. It is generally considered to be better, although there's a debate about this. Do we go to a more cashless approach? And obviously different service areas have been doing that gradually over time anyway. But as I said, it's a flexible arrangement, so it can flex. It's interesting you asked the question about the in-house on the property acquisitions, because I actually asked exactly the same question and was given assurances around the sort of the fluctuating nature. So it's not as, it's going to be a kind of up and down depending on what's in the market at any one time. So it's not quite, so it's not, we may, if we were to employ people on a permanent basis to do this work, there would be troughs where they would have no work to do if they were focusing purely on this. So we brought an additional resource. The idea of this again is it gives you the flexibility. But I was satisfied with the answer.
Well, my point on that was that we've got more than the lawyers. You're talking 230 properties.
But I'm not sure it's specifically lawyers, it's to do with the sourcing of those properties as well, valuations.
We've got valuers here, that's the That's where I'm just a bit dumbstruck by it all. Your explanation.
Councillor Jenkins?
Yes, can you tell me why, given that we're replacing SAP, we're going to spend £500,000 on a NetWeaver licence? And my other question was to do with the water. Am I right in thinking this water contract's been out of contract since 2017? And presumably now that we're procuring a new water contract, that will be cheaper than the out of contract one that we're currently running. So how much have we wasted over the last 4 years by being out of contract on the water supply?
On the second one, I'll have to get back to you on that one. In terms of that, I think there is a period, to my understanding of it, but again, I'll get some further. I think there is an overlap period, effectively, between SAP and ERP, and therefore we need some of the licenses to run over. So
I know there's an overlap, and we don't know if Oracle will go in on time. It's scheduled for April next year, and I still think you'd do well if we achieve that. But why then are we buying £500,000 with the NetWeaver licenses? NetWeaver is like the technical infrastructure on which SAP sits. I just don't know why we would be doing that.
I say you can't flick a switch. It's my understanding you can just flick a switch, and one day it's one day it's Oracle, and one day it's SAP, and the next day it's Oracle. There is an overlap, and therefore we need all the elements of SAP to be in place for it to continue to be working.
But no, when we go live on Oracle, we will switch off the SAP system, other than for accessing possibly legacy data.
Exactly, and I think that's the main. And of course, there is clearly, I don't want to say too, there's clearly a risk in that transition period, isn't there? That's a high risk. We should hopefully be in a position where everyone, and I am fully confident we'll get there, but there's clearly a degree of risk around that. And therefore, it's right that we don't want to be in a position where we don't have cover for that risk. I think it's very low risk, but it's a very impactful risk, let's call it that, were it not to be landed successfully.
Right, but I know that, but I'm still not sure why we'd spend £500,000 on what appears to be new NetWeaver licenses.
Well, let me take that away and get further clarity, because it's not my service area, but I'll take that away and get clarity.
That will be in line for the first few months, because we'll be closing the accounts in April, May and June, and the audit will take place, so we'll need the account, there's SAP to be open, but we will again. I'm not sure the detail of that, but we will be using SAP rather than just a read only for activity, day-to-day activity, not for accounting.
No, I understand that. My question is, we've got the licenses in place for the legacy system. Why do we need another £500,000 of the NetWeaver licenses? I'm sure there's a good explanation, and
we'll take it away.
Yeah.
Mr. Bishop to get you away.
Okay.
Well, I think we should ask that
Thank
question.
you.
Chair, just one on the water contract. Is it not possible to work with local authorities?
So I'll take that away. I mean, I know that our procurement service generally are always open to discussion with authorities. However, I think partly due to our scale, and the relative size of us to local authorities, the net benefit is often quite limited purely because of if they're only 20% the size of us, the net benefits of a group procurement is not going to be huge compared to the amount of work the endeavour will take to get to that point.
Okay. Thanks, Tristan, Alison, Mohammed, Tim. Thank you so much. Work programme?
Just for noting.
Yeah.
Comments?
Any comments? No. Dates and meetings? Okay. Request for calling?
Chair, have we been sent invites, calendar invites for these meetings that you're proposing?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Yeah. Other urgent business?
Just to state that we're going to miss them. I think
Authority to chairperson? Really? Can I just before I close the meeting, this is, I think, Emma's last meeting for this one, resources.
Yeah.
Just like to thank her, brilliant job she's done for the city council over the last 20 odd years.
Not quite. 20.
Not quite. That's close, you will be missed. You will be missed. Thank you for everything you've actually done for Scrutiny over the years.
And you'll be bored senseless in Cornwall. You'll be back in
What do you think?
the
Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, then the meeting closed.